December 7th, 1941, a date that will live in infamy. We all know the story of Pearl Harbor, or at least we think we do. We know about the surprise attack, the battleships burning in the harbor, the nearly 2,400 Americans who lost their lives that Sunday morning. But what if I told you that the most heroic stories from that day aren't the ones you've heard? What if the real heroes weren't the ones who made it into the history books, but rather a handful of forgotten individuals who were the very first to fight back against the Japanese assault? Today, we're going to uncover the incredible stories of the men and women who didn't wait for orders, who didn't hesitate when chaos erupted around them, and who became the first line of defense when America was caught completely off guard. When most people think of Pearl Harbor, they imagine a peaceful Sunday morning suddenly shattered by the roar of enemy aircraft. And that's exactly what it was. At 7:55 a.m., the first wave of Japanese planes descended upon the naval base like a swarm of deadly hornets. The attack was meticulously planned, catching the American forces in their most vulnerable state. Most sailors were either asleep, at breakfast, or preparing for church services. The element of surprise was complete and devastating. But here's what the textbooks don't often tell you. Even in those first chaotic moments, when confusion reigned supreme and communication systems failed, there were individuals who immediately recognized what was happening and took action without waiting for official orders. The Japanese strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. They knew that if they could cripple the Pacific Fleet in one decisive blow, they could buy themselves months, perhaps even years, to consolidate their conquests across the Pacific. Admiral Yamamoto's plan called for 2 waves of attacks, targeting battleships, aircraft carriers, and airfields simultaneously. The goal was to destroy America's ability to project naval power in the Pacific for as long as possible. What they didn't count on was the immediate response of a few extraordinary individuals who would become the forgotten heroes of that infamous day. Let's start with Doris Miller, a mess attendant aboard the USS West Virginia. Miller was an African-American sailor in an era when the Navy severely limited the roles that black servicemen could fill. He was assigned to serve food and clean quarters, never trained for combat. When the attack began, Miller was collecting laundry below decks. As explosions rocked the ship and it began listing heavily to port, Miller could have easily sought shelter. Instead, he ran toward the danger. He first helped carry wounded sailors to safety, including his mortally wounded captain, Mervyn Bennion. But Miller's heroism didn't stop there. When he reached the deck and saw unmanned anti-aircraft guns, he didn't hesitate. Despite having no formal training on the weapons, Miller began firing at the attacking Japanese planes. For approximately 15 minutes, this mess attendant turned warrior blazed away at enemy aircraft, becoming one of the first Americans to return fire during the Pearl Harbor attack. Witnesses later reported seeing Miller shoot down at least 1, possibly 2 Japanese planes. His actions were so remarkable that they would eventually earn him the Navy Cross, making him the first African-American to receive this honor during World War II. But Miller wasn't alone in his spontaneous heroism. On Ford Island, in the middle of Pearl Harbor, Lieutenant Commander Logan Ramsey was one of the first to recognize that this wasn't a drill. As operations officer for Patrol Wing 2, Ramsey was in the command center when the first bombs began falling. While others stood frozen in disbelief, Ramsey immediately sent out the famous radio message that would alert the entire Pacific Fleet. AIR raid Pearl Harbor X, this is not drill. This message, transmitted at exactly 7:58 a.m., was the first official confirmation that America was under attack. But Ramsey didn't stop at sending messages. He organized the immediate response, coordinating with whatever aircraft could get airborne and establishing communication with other military installations across Oahu. His quick thinking and decisive action in those crucial first minutes helped minimize what could have been an even greater catastrophe. Perhaps even more remarkable is the story of Second Lieutenant George Welch and Second Lieutenant Kenneth Taylor, two Army Air Forces pilots who were stationed at Wheeler Field. The night before the attack, both men had been at an all-night poker game at the Officers' Club. They had just returned to their quarters at Halewa Airfield when the attack began. Instead of seeking cover, these two exhausted pilots immediately realized they needed to get airborne. The problem was that Halewa was a small auxiliary field, and their P-40 Warhawk fighters were there for gunnery practice, not combat readiness. The planes weren't even fully fueled or armed, but Welch and Taylor didn't let these obstacles stop them. They called the flight line, ordered their planes to be fueled and armed, then jumped into Welch's car and raced to the airfield while Japanese planes strafed the roads around them. Within minutes of arriving at Halewa, both pilots were airborne and heading directly into combat. They would become the first American fighter pilots to engage the enemy during the Pearl Harbor attack, shooting down several Japanese aircraft and proving that American pilots could hold their own against the supposedly superior Japanese aviators. The heroism wasn't limited to military personnel. At Hickam Field, which was simultaneously under attack, civilian workers showed extraordinary courage. Among them was a young mechanic named Joe George, who worked for the civilian contractor maintaining aircraft at the base. When the bombing began, George could have fled to safety. Instead, he ran toward the burning hangars where several aircraft were trapped. Despite the ongoing strafing runs and the very real possibility of explosions from fuel tanks, George helped push several valuable aircraft out of the burning structures, saving them from destruction. His actions preserved precious military assets that would be desperately needed in the coming war. Similarly, at the Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard, civilian workers like shipfitter Robert Norman immediately began rescue operations, pulling wounded sailors from the water and organizing impromptu first aid stations. These civilians had no military training, no obligation to risk their lives, yet they stepped forward when their country needed them most. One of the most overlooked aspects of the Pearl Harbor response involves the women who served that day. While they weren't in combat roles, several nurses and civilian women showed incredible bravery under fire. Lieutenant Ruth Erickson was a Navy nurse at the Pearl Harbor Naval Hospital when the attack began. As wounded sailors began pouring in, Erickson and her colleagues worked tirelessly under extremely dangerous conditions. The hospital itself came under attack, with Japanese planes strafing the building. Windows shattered, and the building shook with each nearby explosion. But Erickson never left her post. She worked for hours treating the wounded, often having to make life or death decisions about who could be saved and who was beyond help. Her calm professionalism under extreme duress saved countless lives that day. What makes these individuals truly remarkable is that they acted without orders, without clear command structure, and without knowing the full scope of what they were facing. In military terms, they showed what's called initiative under fire. The ability to assess a situation quickly and take appropriate action without waiting for someone else to tell them what to do. This kind of leadership and courage can't be taught in a classroom or learned from a manual. It comes from something deeper, a sense of duty, courage, and love of country that transcends formal training or official responsibilities. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor was designed to demoralize America and demonstrate the futility of resistance against the Japanese Empire. Instead, it awakened a sleeping giant and revealed the true character of the American people. The forgotten heroes we've discussed today, Doris Miller, Logan Ramsey, George Welch, Kenneth Taylor, Joe George, Robert Norman, Ruth Erickson, and countless others, proved that America's greatest strength wasn't in its battleships or aircraft, but in the courage and determination of its people. They showed that when faced with overwhelming odds and surprise attack, Americans don't surrender. They fight back. These stories matter because they remind us that heroism isn't always about grand gestures or famous battles. Sometimes it's about ordinary people making extraordinary choices in moments of crisis. It's about a mess attendant who picked up an anti-aircraft gun he'd never been trained to use. It's about pilots who raced into combat while still exhausted from an all-night poker game. It's about civilians who risked their lives to save military equipment and wounded strangers. It's about a nurse who stayed at her post while enemy planes strafed her hospital. These were the first Americans to fight back on December 7th, 1941, and their courage set the tone for everything that followed. The legacy of these forgotten heroes extends far beyond that single day in 1941. Their actions demonstrated that America's true strength lies not in its weapons or technology, but in the character of its people. When the chips are down, when surprise attacks threaten to overwhelm us, when chaos seems to reign supreme, there will always be Americans who step forward, who take initiative, who refuse to be defeated. That's the real lesson of Pearl Harbor. And that's why these forgotten heroes deserve to be remembered alongside the more famous names from that day. If you found these incredible stories as fascinating as I did, make sure to hit that like button and let me know in the comments which of these forgotten heroes impressed you the most. Their courage and sacrifice helped shape the course of World War II and demonstrated the true spirit of America. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more untold stories from history that deserve to be remembered. Ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest videos, exploring the forgotten heroes and hidden stories that changed the world. Until next time, keep exploring the incredible stories that history has to offer.